Welcome back to the Forging Alpha podcast, where we talk about fitness, nutrition, lifestyle design, and just leveling up in general, forging your best life. Today, we're going to be talking about nutrition.
Nutrition with Ricky and Caleb. Talk to us about it, Ricky.
Yeah, man. Nutrition is a huge cornerstone. I feel like there's a few cornerstones that we've talked about on the podcast so far, fitness and nutrition being one of the biggest. And so many times we see people that kill it in the gym and they're not getting the results that they're looking for or the results that they're expecting. And oftentimes that comes down to the nutrition side of things, especially the type of people that are going to be listening to this podcast that probably used to be an athlete back in the day. They know how to train hard, but they might be missing the boat on the nutrition side. And you've helped a ton of people in that realm. Is that correct?
I have.
Fantastic.
That is my world as it stands today. Yeah.
Nutrition.
Nutrition. A lot of the things involved. I've worked with a lot of different demographics. My avatar for who I've helped has been pretty varied, and it continues to kind of evolve. I have been one of the weight gain baseball guys in the baseball industry. So high school, college, pro guys that needed that aspect of coming to me, but I've helped a lot of general population. I'm moving more into the executive and entrepreneurial space, and going from what I was doing primarily with, weight gain and stuff to more, as I'm in this phase of life, performance across the board, performance, whether it's training, just day-to-day business, being able to perform in all aspects. And I imagine you'd agree with this, but what you're putting in is going to directly affect what's coming out in terms of output.
It absolutely does, whether that's performance in business or performance in the gym.
Yeah. So give me your background. Give me your background into when the journey for you started with paying more attention to that,
Okay.
how that's developed to the point you are now.
Yeah. So way back in the day, I'm talking about like fifth grade, I was a pretty chunky dude. Like I didn't even take my shirt off at the lake or anything like that. And it was the summer going from my sixth grade year to seventh grade. So that's when we started summer weights for the football program. Shout out Coach Rice for getting us in there. And that's kind of the summer that I started to pay a little more attention to it. I actually had my Fitness Pal that I used for a while back in the day. So
What year was that?
Gosh, seventh grade. That had to have been 2009.
So back before macros were really popular.
It was starting to become more popular, but yeah, it was a different time on the fitness social media world before 2015, really. And I started paying attention to what I was eating. I started to run more. I was being more active. I did used to run a little bit, which is hard to believe now because I don't run very often. But I started prioritizing protein and just kind of paying attention to the things that I ate. And I realized how shitty a lot of foods are that I was eating and how easy it was to kind of just not eat the bad shit and how big of a difference that made. So I put on some muscle going into high school, and then kind of it was a passion ever since. So
yeah,
I've been paying attention to that stuff for a while.
Give me a little more detail when you started, obviously, 'cause your bodybuilding journey, because that affected it, and then the powerlifting. Like how much more magnified was your diet when you? Because was it powerlifting or bodybuilding first that you got into?
So I would say it was more so into the powerlifting side. We had a high school powerlifting club that was a lot of fun.
Okay.
And I wanted to look good, but I was training more like a powerlifter. I was prioritizing compound movements, strength, that type of thing. And I took my nutrition up one more level when I went to college. So that first year going into freshman year of college, actually making sure that I was eating enough. Because one of the things running into that senior year when I was competing at a relatively high level, state champion powerlifter, that type of thing, I was still under eating quite a bit, especially in that time period.
Okay.
Where you're going through puberty, your testosterone's through the roof. I should have been slamming more calories and taking advantage of that growth. But going into freshman year of college, that's kind of what I did. So having a minimum of, I think it was like 4,500 calories a day, getting that gram of protein, and put on like 20, 25 pounds that first 6 months in college, broke the 200 barrier. And yeah.
Love it. Love it. How much more magnified was it when you were powerlifting compared to when you were bodybuilding in terms of like driving success or performance within those two sports?
Yeah. So I definitely noticed it more like when you're cutting for a bodybuilding show, like nutrition is the most important part.
Mm-hmm.
And powerlifting wise, it was just more so, am I eating enough?
Yeah.
Since it's just weight class based. So I didn't I didn't pay as much attention while I was powerlifting to my nutrition. I probably should have dialed that in a little bit more. But bodybuilding, I mean, you can't miss the boat on it.
Yeah. And was your off season still relatively focused in terms of you were still tracking throughout the entire off season, or did that really become the focus once you started like a prep?
Definitely more so in a prep.
Okay.
Yeah, like I tried to make sure that I was meeting minimums, like a minimum amount of protein, minimum amount of calories, and then if there's a surplus from that, then awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you go into a prep, that's when things get much more dialed in.
At your lowest, when you were getting to that peak of that, because how many shows did you do?
I did 2.
Okay. And what was the lowest point that you were dieting calorie wise, and how long did you do that for?
So the last show I did, I believe, was either 2017 or 2018. I may have dropped just below 2,000 calories in like the last couple weeks, but overall it was a relatively smooth process.
Yeah.
I was never doing a ton of cardio. I wasn't dropping the calories too much. Like that was starting to get down there, but I was also weighing maybe 185 when I was getting on stage. So a little bit smaller frame than I was used to carrying around in the off season. I was pretty into the if it fits your macros type style of dieting. And by that, I mean, like I had a Klondike bar like every night during prep, just to give myself a little treat, and really just kind of prove to myself and the clients that I was working with that as long as you hit those macros, then aesthetically, you're going to be able to get to where you're trying to go. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best performance-wise, though.
And that's, I think, also the difference with, it's a good kind of segue into the conversation where we're talking about the differences between performance, health, and then aesthetics, right? Because everybody wants to lump those all in to one goal, right? Oh, I want to do X, Y, Z. But at the end of the day, you can still hit a very lean figure and have an aesthetic focus, accomplish those goals. But health-wise, yeah, obviously eating Klondike bars maybe not the most efficient thing when you're that low of calories, and you might not be feeling for performance as well. But then again, you're not stepping onto a powerlifting platform at that point.
There's no barbell up on that stage.
Yeah, 100%. So that's, I think, seeing, hearing from people that have done it, who have gotten to the point of, I mean, how lean were you?
So I had glute striations. I was doing classic physique.
Yep.
So I didn't need to be as shredded as like the bodybuilding side, but ab veins, glute striations, leg veins, probably, if I had to guess, somewhere around like a 7 or 8%.
Yeah,
would be my guess.
Completely naturally.
Those 2 shows are natural. Yeah.
Crazy. Also a great example of people saying that you need to be juiced up or geared out to get that lean, or you need X, Y, and Z to be lined up. Obviously, not necessarily the case.
You can still have a pretty impressive physique naturally.
Yeah.
It takes some work, but you can definitely do it.
Yeah. 100%. So in terms of, when you were powerlifting, it was primarily like on that peak week. Once you would hit weigh-ins, like what would your diet look like? Like, let's say peak week of a powerlifting show. Like what was your nutrition looking like there for performance?
So the weigh-ins were typically like a 24-hour. Thankfully for me, I didn't cut very much. Really, since I didn't really cut weight for a powerlifting competition since probably like junior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I had won my freshman year of college that I did like a small 10-pound cut. It was
Yeah.
pretty easy. So the biggest thing for me after weigh-in was always just rehydrating, like whether that's with some type of Gatorade or liquid IV type packet. We didn't have quite as many options as we do these days.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had that hard of a cut. So after the weigh-in, it wasn't too big of a deal for me.
Yeah. That's a fascinating conversation as well when you're talking about like rehydrating and peaking for a performance event versus like you talk UFC or powerlifting, wrestling versus for a bodybuilding show. Because then again, you're not going out there and lifting a barbell. And that's where conversations about things, like when I first start a conversation with people, our initial call always goes over the triangle of awareness. I think this was coined by Jason Phillips, who I'm working with as a coach now. But that triangle of awareness is those three between performance, aesthetics, and then health. And to some extent, on the extreme ends of the spectrum, the other two are going to suffer as you focus on one, right? So you can think extreme on the health side of things. If you want to live to be 109 years old, you're probably not going to be a bodybuilder, aesthetic-wise. You're probably not going to perform like a CrossFit athlete. And then similarly, if you're a CrossFit athlete, you're probably shaving some life off of your joints. The oxidative stress is probably shaving some years off of your life, potentially. We can get into the drugs and the anabolics that are involved, which, again, you're probably leading to a little bit shortened lifespan because of that. But that's just the trade-off that you're getting. And when we're talking aesthetics, so peak week bodybuilding show, performance is not going to be there compared to where it usually is. And again, no IFBB pro is probably living to be 109 years old either. So I always ask people, gun to your head right now, what is your main focus? That can pivot. If I'm working with athletes, the time of the year dictates some of that. Like there's going to be times of the year where we do focus on the aesthetic side of things in an off season. In season, it's all about performance. I don't care what your abs look like at that point. And then usually after strenuous seasons, whether it's, a CrossFit season, whether it's a race, whether it's a baseball or basketball season, we are usually taking people into a 2-week to a 2-month recovery period where we're focusing on health as a priority and having that all kind of intertwined. But people have this notion, and it kind of goes back to all the past conversations we've had about people want to chase 9 rabbits at one time and usually not catch any versus having like one singular goal. That doesn't mean you might not be able to accomplish a couple of those things. Like you can probably improve performance and body composition at the same time. If you're a newbie, certain situations, but if you're trying to pursue all 3 of those, you're probably not going to go in any one direction very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a time and a place for each phase of it in your training, and you're not going to do it all at once.
100%. And a little background into why somebody asked me 2 years ago. It's like, why do you have such a hard on for nutrition? And it always stuck me. It was just funny thinking about why that is for me. I was a skinny kid coming up out of high school, built like a broomstick. Graduated from high school at 168 pounds. And then between the freshman and sophomore year in college, that summer I put on 30 pounds. Within that calendar year, I went from 168 to 220, eventually bulked up to 240 pounds. I was strong, but at one point I got to the point where it was in a 37-inch inseam jean, which wasn't that great. And so I eventually came back down, and over the course of the last decade, I've gained and lost probably 300 to 400 pounds doing that. And I just saw the differences, one, from a health standpoint that made. I had some health issues, the high school, senior year, freshman year, some autoimmune stuff that would leave me in bed for 1 to 2 weeks at a time where I couldn't see out of my eye. And I had 2 to 3 flare-ups in 2013 with that. And after I got more of a handle on it, more of a focus on not just gaining weight, performance for sport, but also putting adequate fuel in my body, dialing in supplementation, I haven't had that autoimmune flare-up since that year that I had 3 of them, where I essentially spent like 5 or 6 weeks laying in bed, not being able to do anything. So it was rough. I can't really dial in what exactly I did, But I just know I just went full bore into everything, sleeping 8, 9, 10 hours a day, supplementation, vitamins, minerals, and then just, dialing in food selection
Yeah.
primarily. And then, over the course of the next few years, just seeing how I was able to have more mental energy, perform at a high level, even have coaches look at me differently because I was bigger and stronger, being the team captain my senior year, leading most of our team in lifts in the weight room. I just became obsessed with the process. And then getting out of college, pretty much that next month, I had former teammates who I was writing meal plans for. They reached out to me and like, hey, can you write me up plans for that? And so that was my segue into that. It was always kind of a third fiddle thing that I did while I thought I hadn't needed to have a real job. I was still doing nutrition for even professional athletes, NBA and MLB guys, but it was kind of a third tier thing that I did. And then eventually made the jump into doing that full bore, getting all my certifications, working with mentors. And that's where Game Time Nutrition stemmed from. And I've just gone from feeling really bad at a certain point to knowing what feeling really good looks like. And helping people to find that is a passion now, because I think 80% of people walk around today not knowing what feeling good looks like or feels like.
That's the thing. I mean, like, if people have a glaring problem, like they're trying to walk up the stairs and they can't breathe, like then they might notice, okay, I need to do something. But unfortunately, like we've talked about, those changes come up so gradually that you just you're getting used to it as you're getting less and less in shape, and it can be hard to catch sometimes.
Yeah,
It's a slippery slope, but it's a gradual one.
It is. I think we probably agree that both of us have had not major, but minor setbacks and then come ups in the last few years, since you probably not being as much in the powerlifting and bodybuilding space, me not being, a college baseball player anymore. And there's different focuses in life now with work and business that are priority. We're not just in the gym anymore for multiple hours per day, and that's our entire life. Like, we've got other priorities. And I wouldn't say that, I've personally let myself completely go, but there's been years, there's been months, there's been time periods where it's definitely taken a back seat.
Yeah.
And I started feeling bad, and it was, a reminder to me of, okay, time to get the train back on the track, because nutrition is probably the least sexy part of the equation. It's not like going to the weight room. It's not like playing your sport. Nobody comes to you and says, my diet is really good, but my training sucks. Very rarely does that ever happen.
Yeah.
So it ends up being the biggest struggle, just because it does end up being monotonous. It's not super exciting. It's really simple things done consistently day in and day out. And that's probably why it's the biggest struggle for most people in their health and in their fitness journey.
It totally is. What's your diet like now? Are you following anything in particular? Are you tracking macros?
So yeah, I track. I go through periods where I've got a decent baseline for estimating, but the further along that I go where I don't track, it starts to get diluted, and I need to go back to it. So like right now, I've been tracking pretty consistently for the last few months. And more so, I track the macro side of things, but also I'm tracking the micros. Like, I'm using Chronometer instead of MyFitnessPal. And that's super interesting for me, seeing, like, when we talk about performance, because at this point in life, like right now, and again, I think I'm going to get some kind of a challenge, some type of athletic event back in my life. But for me, it's mental and physical performance day to day for me right now. Being able to perform 4 to 6 workouts per week, have the mental energy for business, for my kid, for my wife, and keep the gas tank full.
Yeah.
So for me, like, it's performance across the board. And when we're talking about that, you can't have that conversation without talking about the vitamins, minerals, and the food quality that you're eating. So for me, it's also just as much of an emphasis on macros, hitting my protein goals, but also, am I getting in my vitamins and minerals every single day? So that's been an interesting thing that I've been exploring the last few months, of how do I do that? How do I optimize that from whole foods, but then supplementation to top those things off? Reflecting back on blood work with that. In terms of like what the specifics look like, I try to keep it pretty condensed and simple. There are times where I can be at home and I can get 5-6 meals in per day. But there's time periods where I've got to figure out how to hit things in 3 meals and 1 snack. So I condense my protein a lot. There will be times where I'm getting 70 to 100 grams of protein in one sitting. You know, a pound of meat is a really simple thing that I put in place. If I'm doing that twice per day, I'm going to hit 200 grams of protein. I have a shake or something else on top of that. I'm hitting my protein goal. And then it becomes, you know, the calorie equation, filling in with the carbohydrates and the fats from that. So I try to make it as efficient as possible and as optimal as possible, all within that. So what are the biggest needle movers that are super convenient? So I've got some baseline things that I keep in my diet either weekly or monthly. Every single day I'm having some type of potato for fiber, potassium. I'm usually using a couple sources of protein to get that in. So if I'm having a beef meal, I'll probably have a salmon meal or a chicken meal. I'll have fish a couple times per week. That's kind of a non-negotiable. Fatty fish for the omega-3s. Every day I'm having some type of berries for the antioxidants and fiber. I'm having tomatoes every single day and spinach every single day. And outside of that, it's kind of like filling in the void with variety. But I've got, you know, a set group of things that I base my diet around. There's probably 20 solid foods, and then the variety comes in outside of that. So that's what it's currently looking like for me. What about you?
Well, so first you mentioned a different app other than MyFitnessPal.
Yes, Chronometer.
So tell us a little bit about that and why it's better than MyFitnessPal, or why you're using it instead of MyFitnessPal.
Yeah,
I've been a MyFitnessPal guy for a long time.
So are you on the upgraded one where you've got the barcode scanner?
I'm not. So
Yeah.
I'm still on the free plan, and they're just like slowly taking away things that you can do so that you pay for the upgraded plan.
100%. And I have no affiliation with Chronometer. Actually, I have my own software. Like when I'm working with clients, I'll use Chronometer as a baseline for that. But if you want some more specifics, come see me and we'll get you on something that's more in depth than Chronometer. But why I like Chronometer for myself when I'm trying to evaluate what's going on in the diet is it doesn't have as big of a library as MyFitnessPal. So the food selection isn't as in depth with recipes, but it's enough to be dangerous. It's got pretty much all the baselines that you would need to log food. The barcode scanner is free, for one. I'd say that it is a little behind in terms of the technology and the interface of how it looks. But for me, the biggest needle mover is that it tracks like 50 micronutrients. It tracks your amino acid intake, so not just your protein. Are you getting enough leucine, enough of the branched chain amino acids, every single vitamin, mineral, fiber, and it shows you the foods that you're hitting with those numbers. So like what's moving the needle on your potassium, copper, your vitamin C, and get an idea of where you're at across the board with that. So I'd say it's less maybe technologically advanced because it's just not as big as MyFitnessPal is, but in terms of what the data is that I'm getting and tracking, it is more in depth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might check that out.
Yeah. Check it out. Check it out because it's got the barcode scanner. Some of the recipes and stuff aren't quite in there. You know, it's been one of the complaints from clients is, hey, I can't find this within their library, but it's got enough that 85-90% of things are going to be already in there, and it's going to give you more data. So that's the appeal for me is using that. So yeah, I don't remember what the original question I asked you before that was.
So you had asked me what my diet was like, and my diet right now kind of sucks. So as we were talking about this, I'm like, man, I really need to lean into the quality of my foods. And I'm probably leaving a lot of performance on the table, both in business and the gym, because I'm not doing that right now. I've let the craziness of our workday get the best of me quite often. So it's a matter of either not eating enough and trying to make up for it in the evenings. What are your thoughts on carnivore, keto, paleo, insert said fad diet?
So they have their time and place. They were invented for a reason. Carnivore, and they're all elimination diets at the end of the day, right? And they were invented for a reason, usually clinically. If you make the choice based on your lifestyle, vegetarian or vegan, and you decide to do that, by all means, go for it. You know, I work with some people that are Indian that are primarily vegetarian based that they still include dairy in there. I've worked with some vegans in the past who just made the choice that they didn't want to do that. Cool. I think though that with any diet that is completely eliminating food groups, you can do it. I think you still have better results than most people are saying you can, like when it comes to even plant-based proteins and things like that. But I think that there is always going to be major holes in that diet. And I think for most people, they're not going to take the time or have the attention and bandwidth to make those diets as optimal as possible. For instance, a vegan or vegetarian diet. Supplementation is probably going to be twice as much as you would be with a well-balanced animal-based diet that includes fruits and vegetables, because you're not getting a lot of the essential amino acids, omega-3s, you're lacking a lot of the B vitamins and the zinc. So that starts piling on more things on top of that we need to start looking at, which for some people could be a barrier entry to making that a healthy, sustainable diet. We're in that phase with going to specifically carnivore and keto. I think we're kind of back end of keto, carnivore's all the rage, right? I have some clients that are modified carnivore, modified keto. Those clients suffer from IBS issues, gut distress. They've been through lots of different tests looking at gut health, and we've tested a lot of things. We've done elimination and then reintroduction of foods, and we've noticed that like high fiber foods tend to be problematic. There's something called FODMAPs, which is essentially high gas foods. So high FODMAP foods, for them, it causes a lot of bloat, upset stomach, and lack of digestion. So for them, like knowing that, we found that in order to have a good quality of life and feel good, it had to be primarily animal-based, protein, fat dense, and then we added in carbohydrates and the fiber from berries and fruit. And so I'm never completely about eliminating that, the fruits and vegetables side of things, because I've seen the blood work of that. I've had clients come to me after being on carnivore and keto diets, and I've seen triglycerides, cholesterol through the charts, which is going to be plaque buildup over the next 20 years. You're going to be a widowmaker, heart attack in the making soon. Because the thing is, there is no study showing that you're not going to live longer with fiber in your diet. We suffer a lot from oxidative stress today. So phone screens, the environment, technology, all this oxidative stress that's coming in. The only way to combat that is antioxidants within your diet. And that only really comes from berries, fruits, vegetables. So if you're completely eliminating that, you're eliminating the things that are combating stress in your life. So that's why you see people like Liver King that look 70 years old right now, because oxidative stress, plus like steroids, which add to that oxidative stress, and they just look terrible with it. So I think it has a time and place for 1% of the population to have long-term. I think it's popular, carnivore and keto, staying on that topic, because you do see rapid progress. You see fat loss right off the bat. You see weight loss primarily because you're eliminating so much water, right? Anytime you're eliminating carbohydrates, you're eliminating probably half the water you're going to hold in your body. So you're going to see the scale just drop really quickly. Long-term wise though, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot, because as soon as that initial weight loss stops, you're going to stall out because you're not just losing water anymore. Right. Performance tends to suck on ketogenic and carnivore diets, unless you are doing power walking or some non-glycogen and carb demanding sport that's going to be like long distance or power walking. I think people feel great initially because cortisol is super high, right? So those stress hormones, which is like adrenaline related. So you feel great initially when you eliminate carbs because that cortisol is going to give you an energy boost. But 99% of the time within probably 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you're going to feel like crap because you can only just keep pushing that cortisol, that adrenaline button for so long. It's like caffeine or Adderall or energy drinks. You're going to feel great doing those, but at a certain point, you keep pushing that adrenal system too much. eventually it's going to come crashing down. You're just going to be tired and lethargic. So I think short-term wise, that's where people get so wrapped into it because they feel good. And then inevitably they end up feeling like crap. And so then they stop. They add carbohydrates back in, and your body got used to not using carbohydrates, so you don't use them as efficiently. And so then your diet really sucks. But then you're going to try carnivore again, have it great initially for another month.
Yeah.
And then it's going to stall back. And so it's just this yo-yoing back and forth on this hamster wheel, where to me, with what I'm doing and when I'm working with any client, how do we build a lifestyle? How to build something that's not just a 30, 60, 90-day fad? How do we take what you like to do, what your goals are, and what we think you should be doing to optimize that goal, and wrap that all into one thing that you can do for the rest of your life and change it based on your goal, right? So if you can take the same group of foods that you would use for cutting and manipulate the amounts or the types for when you're bulking and just switch that back and forth, that makes your life so much simpler. That makes your life so much more sustainable. And that's ultimately what I think you should do, which at the end of the day comes back to a well-balanced diet that's not completely eliminating everything.
So when a new client comes to you and say they're like a 40-year-old, works a desk job, trying to lose a little bit of fat, gain a little bit of muscle, relatively detrained, what's the first thing you're going to be doing diet-wise? Is it, hey, let's make sure we get these foods? Or is it, hey, let's not eat these foods? Or what does that kind of look like when you're helping a client?
Great question. So initially, when we start with the onboarding process, and I've got a pretty intensive onboarding process, we're looking at a few things. So my process now usually starts with a metabolic assessment. So we're looking at, because the function of muscle building or fat loss is essentially stress and adaptation, right? It's all just stress and your ability to adapt to whatever you're imposing on it. And somebody might come to me needing to lose 10 pounds, but is your body in a state to where you're able to do that right now? Because if you come to me and we look through that assessment and we see food quality sucks, you're sleeping for 3 hours a night, you are working out 5 hours a day already, and you've tried 15 diets in the past and probably, been pushing the envelope with low calories as it is, you've probably lost the ability right now to lose fat. I mean, especially like with the sleep thing, like you're not going to be in a state where your body's primed to lose those 10 pounds. And so with that, it's like, all right, I recognize what your goal is, but you've been trying 5 diets. The solution isn't another diet. What we need to do is we need to fix the internal machinery. We need to get your lifestyle on par so that you are ready to be able to actually achieve your goal. Because we want to achieve your goal as fast as possible. We got to make sure that you're going to, and not just waste your time or my time, and also do it as healthy as possible. So one, we have to look at that because they might have whatever goal they want, but if they're not in a position to be able to do that, it doesn't matter. And so that's where then it becomes individual. How overweight are you? How much muscle mass do you want to be able to put on? And that's where we look at, the triangle of awareness. Let's do a full evaluation. Tell me what you really want right now, but then let's talk through what that's going to require to hit that goal. Sometimes by the end of that conversation, that has completely changed. They're like, maybe I don't want to be dieting and hungry and low libido right now. Maybe I want to focus on my health and feeling good and having some performance, getting my hormones back on par. So we're running through that metabolic assessment. We're looking through food preferences. So again, going back to a lifestyle design, I could have the perfect plan on paper that would be chicken, broccoli, and your 10 servings of fruits and vegetables. If you're not going to do it, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's why I think where most people get in trouble. We've got all the information out there. I put a video up the other day about this. Everybody knows what macros are. Everybody knows what protein is. Yet we're more fat and we're more unhealthy than we've ever been in the past. And why is that? So it's probably not an information issue. It's probably not you needing to try another diet issue. It's probably something to do with either accountability. It is something to do with personalization to you and your lifestyle, or there's something going wrong with what you're trying, which ends up 90% of the time being the case. And so we can't just throw a blanket another diet at them, because odds are they've probably tried that, right?
Right.
I'm typically not the first person they've came to for what they're looking to do. So we take all of those things into account. A new phase we've started adding in is a lot of the blood work. So that adds on to that metabolic assessment of looking at, what is the internal machinery looking at? Because if you don't have the energy right now to be doing it, if your thyroid's completely shot, you're not going to be in a state of like losing fat. And so, like for that example, if you're not in a position right now to lose the body fat, we're going to try to get you healthy. We're going to try to get the hormones right. We're probably going to add some calories back in, get the food quality in there so that you're supporting all those metabolic processes in the body. Because, you can get to your goal with macros, but in terms of how you feel and how you perform, that's where like the vitamins and minerals and the micros come in. So we need to make sure we're looking at that as well. And then from there, we're going to phase it and periodize it. I don't like taking somebody into a 2-year cut. I think it's a recipe for disaster. And you think about most people that are trying to lose weight, that's probably what they've been doing. Obviously, holidays came, they completely fell off the roller coaster, but like that's been one focus for the last 3 years.
Right.
Versus I'm like, once we get you into a state where you're primed for your goal, let's do it and let's get to it as quickly but as healthily as possible. And then let's pivot. Because at the end of the day, my goal is not to have anybody eating the least amount of food as possible, right? You want to be driving more food that your body can utilize, because that's a definition of a healthy metabolism, right? You think about the high schooler that can eat whatever and they're still 8% body fat. That's ultimately what we want to be working towards. Might not look like 5,000 calories, but if you're surviving off 1,700 calories per day for years on end, you probably have less muscle mass. You probably have less energy, less recovery, and less vitamins and minerals come in, because less food equals less nutrients. So eventually, we want to get you to a phase where you're pushing up more food for your maintenance, but also every single year, I like most people going up into maintenance or a slight surplus to fuel feeling better performance in the gym and more energy. So that's a broad 20,000 foot view of what we're doing with people when we first talk about those goals. Because initially I would be like if you were talking to me 3 years ago, it'd be like, all right, like let's go towards that goal and look at and just try to do it. And we'd be running into a wall with especially the fat loss, because the 40-year-old is typically coming to me with fat loss side of things.
Yep.
It would work. Sometimes it wouldn't. And then when I wasn't looking at those other factors, the stress, what does your job entail, the sleep, they weren't necessarily losing weight the way they wanted to. And then, it would be something that they were angry at me about, when it's just not the case all the time. Like you might not be in a position where you're able to do that right now. And so we need to find that out first and foremost. And then that dictates the path that we go and then pivot to afterwards.
I love it. I think that's what great coaches do, is they have to figure out where you're at now before they can help you get to where you're trying to go.
100%. And I think for people like you that are self-educating, they're driven, you can probably, get into your macros, get an idea of that. If it's wrong, pivot. And obviously you've got the know-how, the discipline, and the bandwidth to do that. And especially probably when you were younger, when that was your thing to do that. For a lot of people, though, they do not have that level of intuition, education, or the ability to pivot off of things, right? That's where I always say calculators aren't coaches. And so the MyFitnessPal isn't always taking into account, what are Ricky's preferences? What does his lifestyle look like? And so you blanketly throw a macro number at somebody. How many people are actually finding success with that long term? Anyway, that's why you always have people that, like, I don't just sell macros. Like, they are a very important part of the equation, but you get these coaches that are just, I'll calculate your macros for you for $200 and then on your way. And it's a great business model, because you probably get 200 people that are coming back to you for new macros, because it's like just a revolving door of, maybe I need new macros for this, when I didn't even follow what I got right from the get-go. And so, again, all the information is out there, but why is nobody doing it, right? And how do we figure out that psychological game? Because at the end of the day, like, diet is probably 90% psychological. So application, personalization, and then the mindset that comes with that, I call it like our MAP process. Like, you've got to have the mindset to be successful with it. You've got to have it personalized to your life, and it's got to be applicable to what your goal is and what you want to do or else it's not going to work. And for some people, like there are people I recognize I'm not going to be able to help. Like they're in just that boat where, cool, you're killing it, you're making progress, you've got this dialed in, go do your thing. I'm not going to be able to move the needle for you that much. But for a lot of people, it's just like investing in a coach for anything or a mentor, like the accountability portion and just knowing more of the specifics with it. It's just it can be helpful because nutrition is just such a funny thing. It's a funny thing because there's no one answer to it, right?
Speaking of no one right answers though, what are 5 foods that you think everybody should be including in their diet weekly?
I'll entertain the question, even though that's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I think potatoes, though, that will typically be in there. Usually well processed. I really haven't met anybody that couldn't handle potatoes, sweet potatoes or white potatoes very well. They're low glycemic. There's actually a ranking of foods of ones that keep you the most satiated and full, and potatoes are at the top of that list. So like a boiled potato tends to keep you pretty dang full. So somebody that's in a diet phase, that's awesome for them. If you're somebody that's wanting to bulk, let's do hash browns that are super easy to get down. But potatoes are like twice the amount of potassium as bananas too. So everybody talks about bananas for like potassium. Potatoes have twice as much. So you can really move the needle towards hitting your potassium goal with potatoes. So I think across the board, they're good. So that's one. Blueberries would be the other one I would say definitely. That would be, whether you're 5 or you're 90, I think that the polyphenols that are in there, all the things for your brain, antioxidants, polyphenols, there are a ton of studies showing how beneficial that is. Preventative for getting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And then on the performance side of things, they can help increase IGF-1. Is it any meaningful? I don't know. Maybe not. It's not going to blow you up. But there is some meaningful impacts on your performance from blueberries. They're super micronutrient dense. They're low calorie, so you can add them into a dieting phase super well. They're a great treat for people. Like you can eat 2 cups of blueberries, and that's going to be like 80 calories. So blueberries are in there. So we got sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, either or. We've got blueberries. I would say some omega-3 source. So if you're eating meat, salmon, typically. I'm a weirdo and I'll use sardines too because they're canned, they're convenient, and you get a ton of those omega-3s. If you are vegan or vegetarian, some type of algae source is going to be pretty high in omega-3s, but some type of omega-3 source, either plant-based if you're a plant-based person, or fish if you eat meat. So that's 3. Eggs, I'd say if you are eating meat, which again, going back to like what moves the needle, and after doing this tracking like on Chronometer, eggs hit a ton of those different variables. Sulfur-based food, you got copper in there, you got choline. It's one of the only sources of dietary choline, which is like fuel for your brain, and you get a lot of that from eggs. Your B vitamins, so eggs are definitely kind of one of nature's superfoods. And then I'd have to say red meat.
Okay.
I'd have to say red meat in there. Again, looking at bioavailable, meaning your body is going to process and digest it super well. Iron, so hemi-iron, that's the issue with people that just take like regular iron supplements, is that it's not very absorbable because it's usually coming from like a rock source. Like there's iron in your water, but your body doesn't use that as well as hemi-iron coming from meat. So it's a pretty absorbable source of iron. You get your zinc from there. You get a lot of your B vitamins. You get creatine from there. So I'd say like red meat is actually one of the most nutrient dense things. And so obviously I'd say a lean source of that. I think that you probably shouldn't be ripping ribeyes all the time or fatty cuts of it. Like try to get leaner cuts of meat because saturated fat is probably not doing anything super healthy for you, but red meat is. So bison, lean ground beef, your top sirloins, your top round are probably good go-tos for getting in that. So that would be probably my top 5. There's other, fruits, vegetables, and I think dairies top 6 in there too. So getting yogurt or milk in, even though that's been kind of demonized in the past. But if you're not including that in, you're probably not getting your calcium in. Like when you start tracking on chronometer, it's hard to get calcium in without dairy. And it's a good fat source. So even though it's saturated fat from dairy, they've actually found that like the immunoglobulins, the certain type of fats in dairy, are actually super healthy for you and probably going to have a positive effect on your cholesterol levels on blood work. So, but that would be my general top 5 right there. What about for you?
Oof, I think you had an excellent answer, Caleb. What Caleb said. What about 3 foods that people should generally avoid?
Now that's a good conversation because, in your opinion, is there one food that's like killing everybody?
I feel like there's not.
Yeah. And obviously from what you've done, you've eaten Klondike bars and gotten to 8% body fat every single night. So no one food in isolation is going to kill you, right? I'll make the list and we'll talk a little bit about it from there. Alcohol is probably one of the worst things. It's one of the only things that is directly tied to 7 different types of cancer, that is going to shit on your sleep, increase inflammation, going to lower your recovery. So, I mean, it's a toxin. So your body's going to prioritize getting rid of that versus protein synthesis, recovery, and using the nutrients from your food for rebuilding your body. So especially if you had more than a couple of drinks, it's going to spend that time getting rid of that. So if you went out and you had a 10-drink binger, you're probably spending the next 48 hours putting your gym progress on hold to some extent because your body's taking that time to eliminate that out of your body. On the flip side of that, you see how many people drink, and you see that people are literally putting poison into their body, and most people aren't keeling over dead. So that's where I think that one food in isolation isn't going to kill you. The dosage makes the poison, how much of it you do, and the accumulation of everything else. So I think that if you enjoy drinking, you can keep the rest of your lifestyle 90% on par, and you're keeping it a couple of drinks per week. You could probably hit 99% of your goals and still be healthy while drinking. But it is one of the only foods that is directly tied to giving you cancer. So that would be number 1. Number 2, I would say charred meats. So meats that are like barbecue meats that are super charred, cooked in a certain way, a ton of smoke. Those would be number 2 if you're not eating plants with them. So going back to that thing, they've shown that red meat is to some extent carcinogenic. It's going to increase your odds of cancer, especially like colon cancer. But when they've done studies where there's been plants involved, where you're eating vegetables alongside of your meat, you're eating blueberries alongside that steak, it pretty much negates that out. So that's where I think that like people with like carnivore keto, we're going to start seeing people getting in trouble with that because, they don't have that safety net in place that's helping with that. So that would be number 2. And then number 3, a third food that I don't think people should eat. I think trans fats should be something you should limit. It should not be something you're eating consistently. So
it was illegal for a while, wasn't it?
I don't know. I know in other countries there are things that are not allowed.
Yeah.
Certain dyes, but I think things that are like your Crisco lard, that donuts, like, deep fried donuts, anything that's cooked in Crisco, your pizzas, things that are high carb, high fat, highly processed, and super easily eaten, very highly palatable foods. That's just a generalized one, but anything that's like high in trans fats and that's super easy to get down and super high calorie dense, and you can put a bunch of foods. All the crap foods would essentially fall into that bucket because
that's a big bucket.
It is a big bucket. And most of the time too, people think that a lot of those foods are high sugar foods, right? Your cake, your cheesecake, your cookies, your ice cream, they do have a lot of sugar in them, but actually majority of there's a higher portion of calories coming from fats in those foods than sugar. There's a lot of sugar, but you also have to look at it's not just high sugar with those foods, because you could go eat some Fruity Pebbles and it's pretty relatively low calorie, even though there's a lot of sugar in there. You got the fat on top of high sugar, that's where you get like 1,000 calorie bomb in a dessert. And so that's where I think you should limit those things. You shouldn't be eating them every single day. So the video I made the other day too was talking about this group of people, well-known people in Washington, D.C. I don't know if they were testifying in front of Congress, if they were just at a like a conference, but as people essentially, shouting about the food dyes that we have here, the American standards for diet, however, like all of these corporations are controlled by, like big pharma, all the interconnections. And I do agree that there's a problem with certain things, but nobody is getting cancer just from eating like food dyes in cereal, right?
Right.
Nobody's dying from having 1 donut per week or 2 donuts per week. I think that outsourcing your diet or your responsibility to somebody else about why that is, like the accessibility of food, is not going to change anything. And then number 2, it's the entire picture. All these studies showing that there's negative outcomes from any one particular food. You also look at the people that are involved in those studies. What does the rest of their lifestyle look like? Like if you're drinking a 42-ounce Coke per day, you probably smoke, you probably have terrible sleep, you're probably not exercising, you're probably not eating any fruits and vegetables. So the accumulation of all those things probably is causing more harm than just that any one particular food. Like it's the entire package of things, right? And that's where you've got to make it a lifestyle. Like if you know that, you can have 1 or 2 desserts per week and 90% of the other things that you should be doing are checked off the list, you're probably going to be fine, man. So, yeah.
I love it. I figured that would be a difficult question to answer because I know what route I was leading you down. Yeah. Obviously, there's not a, hey, stop eating this situation, but there's definitely some common themes that you probably see with the clients you work with. One of the easy ones to throw out there is if somebody is trying to lose weight, stop drinking your calories. That's an easy one because there's a lot of times people running through the gas station, they're hitting QT and they got that 32 ounce that you were talking about, full sugar. And that's a lot of calories when you're just drinking it.
It is. It's not making you any more full. And you're probably not cutting down on anything else in your diet because it's not making you full. Like if you go eat something calorie dense that's making you feel full, you're like, maybe I should eat a little bit less dinner. But you're probably having that Coke in addition to all the other calories.
Yeah, if you go have pizza for lunch, by the time you get to dinner, you might not be super hungry. But you drink a big Coke on your way home. Yeah. It's not going to have a whole bunch of effect on how hungry you are.
Mm-hmm. For you personally, because you've gotten really lean in the past and you've helped clients when you were in the fitness industry with that too. What were some of your tips or needle movers for that fat loss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the biggest things were on the nutrition side, staying away from the higher calorie foods. Like if you're trying to gain some weight, then it's okay. But finding foods that fill you up without... Foods that'll fill you up for a long time, things that are satiating. So protein sources, dairy, all that kind of thing. The biggest thing is finding foods that people want to consume and filling those up first. Or the biggest thing that I found with working with clients was building the diet around foods that they tolerate well and that are going to get them to their goals before we worry about what we need to remove.
And I think that's a good perspective. And I think that coming from somebody that's done it in a fashion that wasn't just eating chicken and broccoli is super important, because we can talk about food selections and hitting your micronutrients and stuff all day. And obviously that's something to work towards and aspire to. But when we're talking baseline, somebody that's 300 pounds and that needs to get the weight loss off, 90% of positive health outcomes, blood work, lower reduction of all-cause mortality diseases, that's going to be found in the weight loss and a calorie deficit by itself, right? So, however you are able to lose that weight is going to move the needle more than all of the other small things. Those are things that come secondary to just let's get the fat off. And if that involves you still eating a few foods that aren't the most ideal. Like, because I've worked with those people, and you've probably worked with those people, and it's not a conversation right off the bat of let's flip a whole 180 with your diet. It's a conversation usually of let's make this as simple as possible to start out with to get some momentum. How do we take what you're eating right now? Like maybe it's a 42-ounce Coke. How do we make that a Diet Coke? Or maybe like 20 ounces? How do we cut the portion sizes down in half before we even start talking about vegetables or chicken and broth? Like, let's take this step by step so that it does end up becoming more sustainable. And it doesn't always have to just be chicken and broccoli. I think that if it fits your macros has shown that, yeah, it might not be 100% ideal, but you can accomplish a lot of things, especially body composition, by getting your macros on track. Like, what would you say to the people that are still preaching it's not about calories, it's not about your macros, it's about just the food quality?
Are there people still saying that out there?
Oh, 100%.
Oh man. Okay. I just feel like we have so much proof now that the macros are going to be the leading indicator of what you look like.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether it's calories coming from chicken or beef or calories coming from Reese's peanut butter cups. If you hit your macros and you hit your fiber, especially like or your protein and your fiber, you're equating for an awfully large portion of that equation.
Yeah.
And like we said, how you feel is going to be different. But if you're just looking at the aesthetic side of things, I think it's pretty clear that the macros are the most important part.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of weight loss, though, I think we have time to hit this. Ozempic. What are your rapid fire thoughts on Ozempic?
Rapid fire thoughts on Ozempic.
And similar products.
They have their place. They have their place. I think that they probably have their place in the fitness community with people that are doing that. I'm not one to judge people for doing that. I think that they have their place in people that have a significant amount of fat loss to lose. So if it's gastric bypass surgery, which typically was the solution for somebody that needed to lose 100 plus pounds, I think that Ozempic is a much better alternative to that. I think without having to get intrusive surgery that's not really solving the internal machinery of what your body's doing, but going more into that internal machinery. If you are also not fixing your habits at the same time, you're not going to be able to stay on Ozempic forever. So as soon as you come off it, you're going to go right back to where you were because you're essentially just blunting hunger signals and it's fatty acid oxidation. So as soon as you stop having that, you're going to go right back to where you were if you're not also working towards a better lifestyle with your food selection, your protein, working out as a whole. Like I've seen it multiple times. People get off it, boom. Within 3 months, they're right back to where they're at. I've seen people lose a ton of weight and then gain it all right back, and then they're back on the Ozempic. And then again, it's back on that hamster wheel of things. So I think it's a good catalyst to get somebody moving in the right direction. I think a few of the things you have to look at, because I do have clients that are taking it, is it is going to nuke your appetite. And so then you run the risk of being micronutrient deficient because you're not eating anything. You do have the potential, if you are dropping your calories double or more, that you're going to start losing a lot of muscle mass, which long-term wise, muscle mass is going to be the thing that is the biggest product of keeping the fat loss off, because your muscle mass requires a lot of oxygen and fuel to keep it. And you're probably not going to be getting in as much protein as you need if you're really not focusing on that. So I'd say it has the time and place. If you're looking at it for a quick fix without fixing your habits, you're not going to have any success. It'll be a yo-yo thing. You will find progress, but you'll be right back to where you were at. And I think you should use it appropriately and still focus on developing what you need to make this a lifestyle again at the end of the day. So those are my thoughts on the Ozempic craze.
So it's at best an accelerant. It is not a magic fix.
Yep. I think you can put it online with things like TRT.
Yeah.
I think TRT and, your hormonal side of things is probably a little bit more of a conversation, but for somebody that needs to lose 200 pounds, like that's probably more important for them at that point of time. And again, it's not going to fix crappy habits.
Right.
So that's my final thoughts on that.
That's your final thoughts on that. Do you have any final thoughts on anything else that you'd like to add?
Final thoughts on anything else? Reach out to us if you want some direction on where you should be taking your goals. I think that having accountability, personalization, and then application of that is super important. And if you're somebody that has spent years doing the same thing and ending up with the same result, you've got to try something different. And that's obviously why I do what I do. So reach out to us on Instagram, shoot us an email, Caleb@GameTimeNutrition.net. And then just to leave you with some value, equate for your calories, equate for your protein and your fiber, and create a lifestyle. Still involve the things you want to, but be 80 to 90% on top of whole and processed foods, and then enjoy the rest of your life so that you don't just burn out and end up spending the holidays on a bender and you're a January 1ster. So that's what I'll leave you with.
I love it. We will catch you next time on the Forging Alpha podcast.
Peace.